When you think about farming, does it go this way or this way? I don't know about you, but I think when someone says vertical farming, I ask, what does that mean? How is it good? Why is it important? Well, stay tuned, and you're about to find out why with Eddy Badrina, who's the CEO of Eden Green Technology, and starts right now. What's happening? Hey there, folks. You are watching the DiscoPosse podcast. Thank you very much. I'm appreciative of all of the feedback that we've been getting. Loving that people are digging the video aspect. We're doing a little catch up. So if you're watching this, you may have already listened to the episode. I hope that you're finding out more about us. And in fact, if you want to find out more about us and all the amazing guests we get, then you just do that thing, click this thing, follow that thing. We're actually doing some neat stuff around video, and I'm sharing more lessons on how we actually create the podcast. So let's get in. Hit that subscribe button. Make sure you hit the little bell icon. You get notified when a new video goes up. And we're going to be doing some catch up pretty soon. They're going to be coming out right as soon as we do audio. We're going to be doing video. This is Eddy Badrina. He's the CEO of Eden Green Technology. Eddy has his own storied background. He runs his own MarTech firm, and he's doing incredible stuff. He's doing good, and I really, really mean that. This is a great lesson in being a good human, creating sustainability, and we learn about how vertical farming is incredibly powerful and a huge opportunity. So let's check it out. This is Eddy Badrina. Enjoy the show.
Hi, I'm Eddy Badrina, CEO of Eden Green Technology, and you are listening to the DiscoPosse podcast.
Now, Eddy, this is really cool because we've got something that is a new area for some of the folks that I haven't had a chance to get into this area on the podcast yet, but my sister turned me on to this idea of the vertical farming world and indoor growth, and then I was lucky enough to be able to get tuned into your story, not just in what the technology and the product you're doing, but you've got a really kind of neat thing that you brought to the team. So at any rate, for folks that are new to you, if you don't mind, just introduce yourself and sort of lay down what Eden Green Technology is doing, and then we're going to jump into. I'm excited about the technology is fantastic, and then we'll get into the business side as well.
Sure. So Eddy Badrina, CEO of Eden Green Technology, based out of Dallas-Fort Worth, down here in the South. And our mission is just to change the way that we are farming produce and feeding people. And we do that through what we term as greenhouse as a service. So we've got patented technology, both hardware and then proprietary software, that allows us to shrink about 35 traditional farming acres into an 1.5 acre greenhouse using vertical farming hydroponic technology. And we're able to do that in such a way that you can place it almost anywhere in the world. You can place it in an urban setting. You can place it in a suburban setting. And it cuts down on the time to market for fresh produce, cutting down from 2,000 miles away from the Salinas Valley in California, which is where a lot of our produce is grown, down to 20 miles or even 200 yards across from a distribution center or a grocery store. So we're really trying to reimagine what locally grown produce looks like, and do it in a way that's accessible and that's consistent and that's safe for the consumer.
And it's interesting that you brought up the idea of course, patented technologies and methods that you're using. This is literally, breaking new ground in the way that you're approaching things. And I was curious as to what brought you to thinking that this is a challenge that both can be solved and also really needed to be solved. How did the team decide that this is an area that we want? Also, one of my favorite titles I saw was agronomists. I've never seen that word before, and I'm going to get you to unpack what that is. It's really cool.
Sure. So there's an origin story to the technology, like any good comic book. any good storyline. There's an origin story, and then there's the part where I came along. So I'll tell you a bit of the origin story, and then tell you how I came into it. So two brothers from South Africa, guys named Jacques and Eugene Van Buren. They were engineers in South Africa, and about probably 8 to 10 years ago, they had an opportunity just to feed kids in their neighborhood, and they were passing out candy. And this young boy came up, and they gave him some candy, and he proceeded to stuff his pockets. And they said, "Hey, slow down there. You know, you don't need to stuff your pockets. There's more where this came from." And he said, "Well, my younger sister's at home, and I'm bringing this to her because it's not my day to eat. It's her day to eat." So that really struck a chord with them. And they said, "Man, this isn't right. This is not the world that we want to be living in." So they turned their engineering minds to focusing on, hey, how can we grow greens efficiently? How can we grow basic foodstuffs efficiently and effectively that would allow just folks like this little kid to be able to have access to nutritious food, right? And thus began the quest to develop this tech. And about 8 years later, they brought it to the States just for more opportunity, more capital, more R&D. And about a year after that, 2 years after that, in late 2019, I came on board as CEO. And I know a lot of your audience are founders and are in the tech space. So I actually came from a MarTech background. I started with my business partner, started a company back in 2010 that was in digital ad tech and digital marketing, bootstrapped it. So no loans, no lines of credit, totally bootstrapped, took it up to the point where we were acquired in 2016, and then proceeded to work on it with an employment agreement. And then 11 months later, we were able to buy it back, actually, under some pretty unique circumstances.
Oh, wow.
And then we continued to run it. But we had built it so well, even when we bought it back, and we're able to get it back up to speed in probably 60 days, honestly, that it really afforded me the chance to take a step back and say, hey, what do I want this next chapter of my life to look like? And there are three things that were on my heart. One was I wanted to run a hardware software company. I had done professional services, been there, done that, got the M&A t-shirt. And the second was I wanted to build a company that had a unique corporate culture. There's a group out of New York City called Praxis Labs that talks about a redemptive organization, both for-profit and nonprofit. So I wanted to build a redemptive organization. And then finally, and the last piece was that I wanted to make a huge social and cultural impact, so much so that for one level of unit of effort on my part, I wanted it to have an outcome of societal or cultural impact. So I kind of sat on that, and then Eden Green came along, this opportunity came along, and it checked all three of those boxes. So that's why I joined the team. And my role really is to take it to market. It's a great, fantastic technology. We've spent the last probably year honing in on on this greenhouse as a service concept and really honing in the business model. And now we're taking it to market.
And for anybody that didn't sit for a second in their mind on the phrase, "Today is not my day to eat," you don't get much more of an impact than if you can change that for somebody, right? That's heavy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There is there is value creation in all sorts of businesses, and then there's some really special impacting value creation, and that's what Eden Green does, and that's what we're after.
And even when we think of the much more sort of the broader market, right, and being able to make sure that you can do something at a mass market, or not anything mass, but a larger market scale, an audience that allows you to then feed back to a part of the ecosystem, when we move into other parts of the world where they don't have rapid access to internet, they don't have rapid access to electricity, they don't have we take so many things for granted, in what you just go in, like we get angry when the power goes out, then you flick on the switch and it doesn't come on because it's habit.
Right.
And you're
Right.
like, this is BS, like and it's amazing to me that, I've worked with so many folks from around the world, and they'll be like, yeah, well, we lost, it's lost power for a few days this week. So I took a little extra work to get some stuff done. I'm like, wow, a lot of stuff is very just much is part of their everyday.
Right.
So I love that what you can do is applicable to the broader market, but then allows you to feed back to areas where you can really affect change and affect human lives at a really, really cool global level.
Yeah, you what you just mentioned is so key. Is we take a lot for granted. We have so much faith in our infrastructure, and there's so much I would just say a certainty in our lives, right? That we don't even think about it. Like, so I've had a chance to go around the world. I'm on the board of a nonprofit called Seed Effect as well that helps with microfinance and savings groups in southern South Sudan and then northern Uganda, the refugee camps of northern Uganda. And the last time I went over there, it was so apparent, everything that we take for granted. When we, like you said, when we wake up, we expect the lights to turn on. When we wake up, we expect our hit on the ground to be dry, right? We expect that the air conditioning is still working, that the internet's still working. When we get out of our homes, we expect that the roads don't have potholes, and and that they're open, right? We stop by the grocery store, the gas station. We kind of expect that they have things in stock, and the minute our expectations are shot at those highest levels, man, it puts everyone into a tailspin, right?
Yeah.
Well, the reality for the rest of the world is there are no expectations like that, right? They have so much less to rely on than we do, and they operate in a world of just flexibility that we honestly don't have, and so being able to having that perspective and not being able to take those things for granted really allows you to re-see the world in terms of, hey, how can we have so many first world problems, but what can we do in our position, in our stance, to bring technology to better the world incrementally, right? Or exponentially. And in this case, we really do have a chance to change that exponentially, and not just around the world, but man, in our backyards, right? You look at the supply chain here in the United States. Our supply chain is so skewed towards one end in that for the higher end folks, and you and I are probably perfect examples of this. We can reasonably expect that if the grocery store doesn't have something, we can drive to 2 other grocery stores. We can get an Amazon Prime, we can get a DoorDash, we can get everything at a cost. When you get to places like South Dallas, when you get to places, Detroit, other areas, underserved, impoverished parts of town and urban areas, these folks don't have the opportunity, nor the resources, nor the time, honestly, to go to 3 different grocery stores. They're stuck with the grocery store that they have. They're stuck with the bodega that's on their way home from their second job. And those in turn don't have access to, it's just too expensive to get this type of produce. The produce doesn't last as long on their shelf. So they're just getting the bottom of the barrel. So if we can change that even in our own backyard to provide jobs, one of these greenhouses, our 1.5 acre greenhouses, provides up to 30 jobs full time, like no seasonal harvesting or planting, because we have 11 to 13 harvests a year. They're 30 full-time jobs, and they can be placed in a greenhouse that's right in the middle of their community, because these underserved areas, ironically, are in some of the most strategic locations in terms of distribution and supply chain. They're just underutilized because of the sort of the socioeconomic status and the infrastructure surrounding them. So if you had something, which we do, that that needs the base level of infrastructure and can be placed and provide jobs and careers, and then provide 1 million pounds of produce that's flowing out of these greenhouses, both in terms of distribution to retailers, suppliers, restaurants, as well as, you know, a chance to have some sort of nonprofit, philanthropic aspect to it. Man, it is a win-win-win for everyone involved.
Well, it really does raise an interesting thing, you know. Just you know, I'm Canadian by birth and now a U.S. Working my way to become a fully Americanized human. And you know, my wife is from the States here. We live in New Jersey, and you know, when we look at the geography of those two countries, it's pretty fantastic to see the amount of like sort of open area that's in the middle. And I've driven across both countries multiple times, which I do sometimes just because you want to remind yourself of the breadth and the hugeness of what's out there. And it really makes, I love that kind of like introspective feeling I get as I'm going across. And, you know, I'm like driving through South Dakota and through the Dakotas and through all these very, very sort of sparse landscapes. And, you know, you get to a town and all of a sudden it hits you like, I better gas up because like this is no longer an immediate expectation that I'll have 7 gas stations every 3.5 miles on an easy pull off from the highway. And even as simple as that, then, you know, my mind goes to, that's me driving through. This is every day for these folks, right? And like you said, giving them access to jobs, fresh food, you know, and an empowerment feeling. I think about creating, you know, really generally becoming self-sustaining, which is one. There's a couple of good documentaries that are on this idea of the advantage we create by giving people empowerment through self-sustaining, you know, ecosystems and community. It's really, really cool because the knock-on effect to that sort of second stage effect is really strong, because then they often have people within that group that say, hey, what if we actually increase the size of the farm? What if we did more? What if we actually sold this to other folks that are outside all of a sudden they're business folks, right? It's a lemonade stand kind of idea. It's pretty cool to see that opportunity create itself as you give them that first stage.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, there have been studies done in Uganda associated with you know, these microfinance and savings groups, and what they have found, it's actually it's the Chalmers Center out in Chattanooga, Tennessee, that I think did this study. But what they found is that the key indicator to people rising up out of poverty is not exactly financial. It's dignity and self-respect. When people have dignity, that is the ultimate solution to poverty. And a lot of that dignity comes through, like you mentioned, jobs, and jobs that are meaningful, right? In these greenhouses, and we were, as we were talking offline before, it is a nascent technology. It's a nascent industry. Like it's going to be it's the future of farming. When you have a job in these greenhouses, it's not just a job. It's a full-time with benefits career platform, because these greenhouses are going to be around for the long time into the future. And so when they get a low, sort of the base job here as a technician or a harvester or a planter, they can grow into, you know, being a food safety manager. They can grow into being a greenhouse manager, into being a production line manager in these greenhouses, and not just in our greenhouses, in almost any controlled environment agriculture scenario. So we're really not just giving them jobs, we're giving them career platforms, which empowers them and gives them dignity and respect. And man, that's equally, if not as more important, of the actual harvests that are coming out of this. And that's why we think the technology in and of itself, the features and the functions are fantastic. They're patented, they're revolutionary, but really it's the platform that is that this technology allows it to have. It's the platform of jobs, this platform of production, and the platform of locally grown at scale food.
That's big, and it's meaningful. It's one of the things I've always thought, and I really appreciated, as Ray Dalio's book Principles, and one of the core things that he talks about is this idea of like doing meaningful work. And really, and I seek this every day, right? It's the idea that what can I do that I know has a broader effect than someone on me? And in fact, do mentoring. And one of my, people always ask me, I said, what do you see as success, at the end of this period of your life? When you get through these different phases. And I said, my success will be defined by the success I open up for others, not by my own, right? It's if I can
Powerful.
move to that and get, and this is where you see these things of like, what can I do? And, like you said, money, I've always sort of struggled with this idea of, where like traditional charities, and then we know about some of the challenges with the cost of managing them. And then you get folks that suddenly are in the business of charity, not in the gift of charity. In Canada, we actually had a recent, a thing that came out. Was a company called, it was We Day, and Craig Kielberger, who started off an incredible organization and an incredible story and an incredible goal and real heartfelt mission. But somewhere in the midst of it, at a business layer, I don't want to unpack that it was bad or good, but I'll say that they ran into difficulty, which then crossed into the area of lobbying, and it was a big situation. And suddenly that beautiful mission got cut down entirely because they effectively had to disband the entire organization. And, I hope that someone comes in and fills that gap. But seeing those roots, and even like you talk at a business layer, like bootstrapping, that's powerful, right? That you really feel a sense of ownership, literally and figuratively, in bootstrapping it. So if you don't mind, talk about the pivot. I love the pivot story with where Eden Green was, and it's nicely highlighted on the website, which I'll tell people they should definitely go check it out. But I love this idea. Martech to AgTech. How did that happen?
Yeah. So, really, the big thing for me was, absolutely, taking a step back, and it really was a personal pivot, right? I think a lot of folks are looking for the next dollar and looking for the next investment. But, as you talk about just this, I'd say a larger, more higher layer of value creation, right? Value creation for me is not just financial value creation. There's got to be something more for me. So that pivot was really a personal pivot. And that personal pivot revolved around, hey, what else could I be doing with my time and my talents and my treasure, my money, that had a larger impact. And so it was a little bit of soul searching on my part to come to this conclusion that, hey, there are, as an entrepreneur, I love multiple streams of income, and I appreciated, the chance that my marketing company was able to provide, but also there's this thought of, hey, what can I invest in my time and my resources in that would have a different sort of impact and be, financially successful as well. So I really do think the pivot for me started with thinking about free market capitalism in a different way and thinking, hey, what does it really mean to have value creation? Right? Is it sheerly financial and financial engineering? Is it providing jobs, which is great? Or is there something even better, which is providing jobs that are meaningful? And to me, that's a part of that pivot was really diving into Praxis Labs and kind of their framework and their thought. I mean, really briefly, their thought is, most companies are exploitative in that the leaders eat first, in that the the employees are treated unfairly, right? And then lastly, it's a net negative. It's deletive to the community around them. We see those all around everywhere, right? Small mom and pop shops to huge corporations. We also see what are called ethical companies. And ethical companies are where the leaders eat alongside their employees, right? Employees are treated fairly, which is fantastic. And they're a net neutral to the community around them, right? They've got, and you see it like a perfect example of net neutrality in terms of impact, or in terms of just good that they're doing to society around them are carbon tax credits, right? You produce so much carbon, but then you buy carbon credits, and then it kind of offsets, right? And then you're just back down to zero. It's a good ethical company play, right? We think there's a third type of company, and that's a redemptive company. And redemptive companies are where the leaders eat last. They're sacrificial. I mean, it's where employees are not just treated fairly, but they're treated generously and really blessed. And then the last is where it's a redemptive positive. The company is a redemptive positive influence on the community and society around them. And that's what I wanted to build. And so the pivot for me is understanding what that framework looked like, and then going and trying to find a company, or creating a company, or coming alongside a company in this case, that had the, no pun intended, had the seeds there. It just needed to be fully realized and matured.
You got seeds all over your past and future here. Which
Right.
Is, I had to laugh when I saw
it was destined.
When I saw that you were involved with Seed Effect, and then heading over to Evergreen. It's like, this is just, you couldn't write this stuff this good.
yeah. It's couldn't be scripted any better.
So Seed Effect, your day-to-day, your personal pivot. I got to think that this is not new. I bet you there was a young Eddy that probably came up with the idea of a good lemonade stand. Not only did you come up with a lemonade stand, but I would bet that you invited your friend over, and you had him watch the stand, and you gave him 80% of the profit. Right? There's something that feels to me like you've always thought well outside of yourself on what your direct impact is.
That is the case. It's a good, you've got a good intuition. It was really born out of my parents. My parents immigrated from the Philippines in 1969, and they had, I think my mom had about $70 in her pocket when she came over, and my dad had a whopping like 110. Right, this is back in 1969, and they proceeded to come over from the Philippines and make a life for themselves here. And then at the same time, if you can imagine, they sent 50% of their salary, their paychecks, back to the Philippines to support their families. So I grew up in this household of an immense amount of give back, an immense amount of, hey, live within your means, because there's so much else out there that you could be giving to, and then just a posture of personal philanthropy. And having grown up in that, and then I had a chance I went to Texas A&M for undergrad and then grad school, but I had a chance to work for President Bush Sr. in his personal office in Houston. Wow. When I was in college. Yeah, it was a great honor to work for him when I was a junior and senior in high school. In college. But when I worked for him, one of the things that is just instilled as a family legacy, public service is a noble calling. And that when you're in a position, you shouldn't be ashamed of the position that you're in. You shouldn't be ashamed of the wealth that was created either before you or because of you, but that you now have an obligation to give back, and that becomes primary to your whole existence in society. And the kids in that family are taught from a very early age, like, hey, you're here for a purpose, and this purpose is not about you. It's about serving the public. And so that really solidified in me just the approach to take whether it was in government, which I've had a background in government, but then in the private sector, of, hey, I'm going to, I want to make money. I'm a big believer in free market capitalism, but that's not the end. The end is, hey, I do this so that I can also live a life, a parallel path life of public service. And so to be able to integrate those two into a company is just profound for me and really, really meaningful.
It's something that I think the world is always torn when we get into sort of the labeling of things. And it's a really tough one too, because while of course, people would also say Eddy is a rarity, in the way that you are, truly giving, and, your approach is really, it's from the heart, and it gives back to many, and it's pervasive in everything, in the words you say. Even like it's so funny how it's not something you're making up to, like, all right, we're going on a podcast, we're going to sound giving. Like, no, this is not a press release, Eddy. This is Eddy, and the press release is born of his story. But we get into the problem of, when we talk about free market capitalism, of course, right? That's unfortunately the free market has, it has free edges, and
it's free by nature, right? People are free to choose, how they want to run their companies. And you're absolutely right. I mean, that is that's the double-edged sword of free market capitalism. And so, my personal goal is to grow Eden Green so that it just becomes an example of, like, hey, you can do things differently, right? There is more to value creation than just financial, and that for shareholders and for end users, there really is a benefit to building companies like these.
Yeah, and I believe that we will see much more, luckily, with, I'd say, like, entrepreneurship becoming sort of very centric to especially the Americans and the North American story. And I say that, it's even arrogant to say that, but my sphere of vision and influence and what I take in has seen an incredible growth in this, real people that are going back to first principles thinking, that are doing real sort of, we're seeing more stuff with bootstrapping, but yet having huge goals and vision, and executing that with, putting faith, family, charity, making it part of that whole organization. So it's neat to see, and I imagine it's happening in other parts of the world, of course, as well.
Absolutely.
But it takes a while, I think, for the shift to occur, and unfortunately, the sting past, things tends to be stronger in memory than the belief in the future of what people are attempting to do today. And it also doesn't help that you've got 24/7, 365 media that needs to get some buzzworthy headlines every second of the day. Right. Everything has to be scathing and destroys. And I'm like, how about, let's talk about really nice, kind stories. People are doing great things. This doesn't make the news, but so, and that's why I wanted to get to this, is this idea of your marketing. You're in the MarTech side of the world, and marketing, and a lot of it is effectively the idea that you can be a storyteller. You can emote something, like not just tell it, but literally create an emotional response in somebody. And as a leader, it's funny, I'm finding more and more folks that are coming from the background, not with the MBAs, but, other, previous founders, people that are coming from sort of like marketing and sales organizations. They get how to communicate, how to relate. Empathy is part of their day to day.
Right.
And so it's neat to see, that you can come in then to a business, which, I don't want to say you didn't have a background in, but it didn't look like it was an obvious pick.
No, it wasn't an obvious pick. And I think the reason that I was able to come on board, and, super grateful that the investors and the team brought me on board, was because I stories. Like if you look at just anthropology from the very beginning, people told stories. That's one of the differentiators between humans and any other life form, is that we have the ability to tell a story, to get out of ourselves, to create this narrative that is apart from ourselves, to be able to both recall as well as be aware of that recall stories, and then add and embellish and honestly change our story as well, right? Change our own personal narrative. So as if you look at humans as storytellers, and one of the distinctives in our species, if you will, then it just makes sense that storytelling is not just the thing that sets us apart, but storytelling is the thing that's going to attract us the most. So I forgot who said it, but he who tells the best story wins is the quote that I like to use a lot. Because you can have better products. We've seen it throughout the ages. Better products didn't win because they just had worse stories, right? And mediocre products totally take over the market because they have a better narrative. So I think that's a part of it is, and for the founders, especially in the tech space too, in our marketing company, we talked a lot about value proposition versus features and benefits.
Right.
Most founders, especially technical founders, want to focus on features and benefits. Oh, but it's got this many switches and it's got this, whatever, and it can do these 15 things, and they have this laundry list of features that they want to run down, but no one cares about the features. They're like, okay, what's in it for me? What's my value prop? And the better salespeople and marketers and leaders can get to, oh, here's the value prop as I think it, right? But the real empathy is when you can really, really, really understand what is the value proposition and the emotional response from the end consumer or from the stakeholder. And that's when you can tell the best story.
And it's a beautiful pairing when you can bring that and you get these incredible technologies that can be, God, I hate the phrase game changing, right? Or like, but really truly like 0 to 1 ability to affect things, have an exponential effect, or even just an incremental effect, but to have a positive effect and to relate that. Here's the other side of it, right? And, oh, by the way, this is, we have this problem, where you go to the store every day and you have trouble getting whatever. And it's like, so we've actually solved the problem we make it so that you don't have to. You just tap button on your phone and like whatever, and so that allows you to do whatever. And people are like, no, it's funny. Like they just lock in immediately like, oh, that totally makes sense. Versus like, so we've created this company that works with supply chain logistics that through mobile APIs is able to, and like, oh yeah, that's all under there. It's in there. Believe me, that's how it works. But if you don't get to the why it matters to somebody, they're going to give a crap about how it works. Unless they're other fantastic nerds. Like I'm a big nerd inside. So I love getting past the marketing. I'm the guy that is like, okay, cool. I got your one-liner. Love it. Let's get right to how this thing works because I want to hear what's differentiating.
Yeah.
But most people are not, you and me, who we know
they're not wired that way.
Yeah, that's it. And so you really have to relate to them. You have to give them something that's like, oh yeah. Donald Miller's actually so fantastic at it. He's sort of famous. He's a company called StoryBrand.
Oh yeah, StoryBrand. Yeah, absolutely.
When you watch it, you're like, damn it, how is it this easy? But it is not easy to like whittle it down to this real true, one-liner.
Yeah, he has an amazing framework to be able to get your story down to the essence of it, right? And not just the essence of it, but the essence of it in a way that is very meaningful and resonates with the end user and the audience. So that's, I think that's why, and that background and that experience has made me had me well poised to come into Eden Green and really tell the story, because there's an amazing story as well as the technology, but really tell the story and take it to market.
Now, for folks that have not explored what it is, it's actually a great time to, let's actually talk about the technology, because I'd love to hear, because it's like I said, my sister's gotten into the idea. She says, "Hey, like I live in an apartment now. I've moved around, downsized a bit, decided to get into a slightly smaller space, but so I have no garden anymore." And so all of a sudden she's like,
Right.
"What do I do?" And she
Yeah.
started to explore this concept of, vertical farming and indoor farming. Because
Mhm.
not only did it give you you solved the space problem, but you also solved the a growing season problem. I was a landscaper, so I knew precisely when and where I could grow certain things. And all of a sudden, that's off the table when it came to food production. And some people start small, of course. It's like spices, and you're growing parsley and you grow your own butter
Sure.
lettuce. But then very quickly they're like, "Ooh, I wonder if I could grow," and it's like, it's really neat to see. So let's dive into actually kind of where the
Yeah.
technology comes in.
So, I think your sister's is probably familiar with things like tower garden, which are, these home vertical garden hydroponics, right? Those are great for balconies. They're great for patios, but there are a couple of things missing. One is they're not consistent, right? You can't grow those year round. The weather is just doesn't make, especially in Canada or even down here in Texas, the weather is so, there's four true seasons. And when you have seasons, some plants just don't grow in those seasons, right? So there's a consistency aspect of it that doesn't allow for, call it your normal everyday consumer, to really rely on that type of produce. And the second one is scalability. It's great to grow those and have those on balconies. But no landlord of a multifamily housing is going to put every one of those on their balconies as sort of a benefit, right? Because then, what if people don't want them? What if they don't know how to operate them? What if they don't? I don't know, right? So
what if they grow naughty things in them?
Yes, right. What if they go off the reservation, and grow different things in it? So, but then you've got like community gardens, and those are fantastic, but those can't scale up. They're reliant on volunteers. They're not commercially viable. No one's going to sell those out on the marketplace. So you really run into a scaling problem, right? And you see other folks, other people in the space, they are scaling. I mean, they got 60-acre farms and, or fully enclosed, warehouses. The problem is they're not economically sustainable it's a very, 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 very long-term play, and they're not economically sustainable. That's either the prices are too high, no one can afford them, or they're just not going to be, as a business. I have a hard time seeing the end game in that. Yeah. So that's where we come in. We have these, patented vertical 18-foot towers inside of greenhouses that can grow. The density per square foot is just amazing. Again, 1 million pounds of leafy greens in an acre and a half of area, right? And so where flat tray greenhouses, which you're seeing a lot of them, your normal flat tray greenhouses, that literally means they're grown on flat trays in sort of this ebb and flow type system. Flat tray greenhouses, the problem is they require a lot of room, right? So 35 acres of farmland, traditional farmland, is equal to about 5 acres of greenhouse, flat tray greenhouse, which is equal to about only 1.5 acres of our greenhouse.
Wow.
So that's where we're able to really shrink it down and get it to a size that you can put on a city block. And all of a sudden in this city block, it's producing over 10 to 12 to 13 harvests. It's producing 1 million pounds of leafy greens. That's like 2.5 million servings of salad. And so people think, okay, great. So what's the cost though? What's the environmental cost, right? And so here's the comparison. For 1 million pounds of leafy greens, a 35-acre farm would have to roughly 700,000 gallons of water a year. A lot of that's wasted too. 700,000 gallons of water a year. And water is the next oil. I mean, it is going to become a hot commodity, already is down here in the South. So think about that, 700,000 gallons of water from 35 acres of farming land. Our greenhouse one of our greenhouses only consumes 90,000 gallons of water a year to produce 1 million pounds of leafy greens. Your and my houses consume 45,000 gallons of water a year. So in the consumption of 2 households per year, in terms of water, one of our greenhouses can grow 1 million pounds of leafy greens.
It's a big difference between flushing your toilet a bunch of times and creating literally, food for hundreds. Big difference, right? When you think of that effect. It's funny, and you said like water's the new oil, right? I mean, this is the other thing as humans. Well, we're good at storytelling and listening to stories. What we're not good at is learning from the damn stories. Like you watch The Big Short, and you go to the background and like Dr. Michael Burry, who was sort of at the center of discovering and betting against what was the market was going, and no one wanted him to be right. Boy, did they not want him to be right. And he was right. He used an incredible amount of data. And then immediately after that, all of his focus in the past decade has been around water rights and water access in mostly in the United States, because it's such a really, really challenged area. California is really challenged as far as couple of good documentaries on that one, but I'll say tread carefully. When I say it's a good documentary, it means compelling to watch. It doesn't necessarily mean it's based in fact and not without opinion, but it highlights there is a story underneath all of this, and it's very interesting.
Yeah, the undeniable thread is that water is becoming scarce.
Yeah.
And you see this delta, and I think that's where we're in the marketplace, and it's why it's so needed. You see this delta of population growth. You see this increase in water usage, water consumption. But then on the other end of that spectrum, you have that delta. The supply chain continues to stay at this level, and the water consumption with farms becomes actually, runs against that. So you're just having this huge delta of availability of water versus with climate change and just weather patterns, volatility, right? Huge snowstorms in the winter, some years in the Colorado and the Rockies that make for great levels of water and high hydraulics in the Colorado River down to the Rio Grande. And then some you hardly have any, have hardly any at all snow melt.
Yeah.
And so there's just volatility of water availability and matched up against this increase in water consumption and population growth. And you get this, you get a delta that's only lessened if you really, really focus on water usage and being very, very conservative with water. And then likewise with that population growth, you've got supply chains. Supply chains are more fragile. We've seen it in the pandemic, that they break down really, really easily, depending on whether people can get out and drive, depending on, whether people can get out and harvest, depending on all sorts of things. And then you've got this, by some estimates, you've got a 400% increase in the demand for locally grown foods. That's within 400 miles is how we define locally grown.
Yeah.
That delta is almost insurmountable unless you have some sort of revolutionary technological change.
Yeah, and especially if we look at like as an incremental opportunity, everything has to go right, and we all have to do the right things. So there's factors of environment and there's factors of behavior that have to align beautifully to even maintain, let alone gain any kind of thing incrementally. Mm-hmm. And this is why, like I said, I admire that you and the team, it's like you literally have gone back to real, true first principles approaches of like, how can we really break the paradigm on this? And this is, it comes very simply when you look, you say like, don't think about what water is as itself, as a commodity. think of what water does. That's
Right.
the problem that we're solving. And that's huge. It becomes a matter of like, hey, I wish I had, I didn't wish I had more low flow toilets. That's not why we have low flow toilets. It's because there's bloody almonds growing by the hectare that are
Right.
ravaging West Coast water tables,
Right.
which is affecting every crop and every bit of access, which then raises prices in the stores, changes people's access to real good food, and that moves them to behaviors, which gets them into packaged food, gets them into things that are more accessible, more cheaper, can be made cheaper.
Right.
And you literally can shift the way people behave. There's a story about somebody who, she decided that she was going to change her company's health by just moving the pop machine, or soda machine, as you call it down here in the States, from one end of the floor to a really inconvenient spot and putting in 3 water, machines. And over the course of months, just like the attitude and health of the staff was increased because
no doubt
you made a physical change to the environment that modified behaviors. And as a result of that went to the second order effect where they said, hey, now I'm going to not drink as much soda at home and my kids won't drink as much soda. Like you really can do those things. And that's why, like I said, when I look at 1.5 acres, that's not a lot. It's a good size, piece of lands that you can buy for, on Zillow.
Right.
It goes with the house.
Yeah.
And imagine that you could have that much output. It's pretty amazing.
It's incredible. It's incredible. Yeah.
So how does it feel, as you now have to think about the business side of it and weighing growth versus, sustainability of your organization and the vision and, and the ethics? You talked about bootstrapping, and it's a very conscious decision and a challenging one because there's low cost capital out there, especially right now.
Yeah.
It's tempting, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So the marketing company we bootstrapped, Eden Green, has been well capitalized by a group of private investors, and that has really allowed us the ability to just work out what our business model looks like, to be able to R&D and really hone in on this greenhouse as an economic unit. And I think that's one of the things that is among the differentiators that we have, apart from the technology and it's, the patent on it and just the way that we're growing in microclimates. The other differentiator is economic sustainability. And these greenhouses we've designed to be economic units unto themselves, and profitable economic units at that. So our business model is different. And our business model is really focused on, hey, instead of trying to own all the greenhouses and grow and then just sell it to all the retailers and distributors and have our own label, we're actually taking an opposite approach, an entrepreneurial approach, which is, hey, we want to empower entrepreneur-led investor in groups. We want to empower retailers. We want to empower suppliers and growers. We want to empower nonprofits and municipalities and nation states to own their own greenhouses. And the reason for that is, and we'll build it, we'll help manage and oversee and staff and train them. And then we'll obviously charge our technology fee. And again, greenhouse as a service is the concept.
Yeah.
But the reason that we want to do that is because we feel there's a flexibility that is inherent in this platform, so that if you up Northeast in a consumer landscape that is really into spinach, but down south it's really into kale and collard greens, and then in Asia it's really into pak choi, right?
Yeah,
you can grow all those things in their locality, right? There's a flexibility of placement geographically, and there's also a flexibility of what you can grow per the consumer landscape, per the consumer demands. And so to empower folks to be able to own their own greenhouses and be able to do that and then make a profit off of it, well, all of a sudden, again, you're localizing the impact to the entrepreneur, to the workers, and then to the ultimately the consumers. And that's what we're really interested in. That's what no one else is doing. They are not providing economic units that you can buy and invest in and get a return out of, and then have that type of impact.
It sort of harkens back to the cooperative, right? And the early, especially out of farming, that was really what. I mean, I'm not sure if it's down in the States or not, but in Canada we had this literally called co-op.
Yeah.
It's just like
we have co-ops.
Yep. Yeah, and that was the name of it. It was like I remembered going there, and we would get feed from there. While I lived an hour north of Toronto, which was like. That's the world changes a lot in an hour of driving, not as much now. That
right.
area is very, very built up. But it wasn't even a bedroom community for the city. I was born and raised on a farm. And so, yeah, I just knew it was like you went in with your neighbors on livestock, and you'd go to you have a butcher that you all work together, and you go to the co-op for feed. And that was this idea of like sort of shared ownership. And again, I guess it plays into this whole concept of you can create empowerment and people are vested, they have real true skin in the game. And so they not only will be invested in creating the future of it, but they can gain the benefits of it, and it's pretty cool that you can open that door up for somebody.
Yeah, it's a very, very unique opportunity that Eden Green offers, and that's why I'm so excited about it.
So you literally get to sit on both sides of the world, where you're like, hardware and software on one side, using equity to be able to grow an organization, doing fantastic things at an engineering level and at a human, impact level. You've got bootstrap martech. You got I would love to spend an hour and a half talking about that, recapturing the company story. I imagine there's a lot in there that I wouldn't want to
there's a lot
dabble in, but
that may be a second podcast.
I would love it, actually, because those are really interesting stories, because people don't never.
Oh yeah.
It's like a chapter in a book, and people just like, oh yeah, like when you read like Hatching Twitter, and you're like, oh,
yeah, sure.
No one knew about the first 17 chapters of the bloody book. They just know that like they suddenly knew who Jack Dorsey was, and then it's like you go back to the roots, and it's over the span of years. It's over the span of incredible changes in the market, and Steve Jobs, of course, another for sort of obviously an amazing story. But it wasn't as though he like, oh, darn, we're having a little bit of financial trouble. Let's bring Steve back and see what he can do. This is like warring nations to get it to come back. So it is a real interesting sort of Phoenix Rising story when you can have that happen. So, but yeah, I'm going to steal you for another podcast, because I'd love to actually dive into that story. But but really the idea that you're acting and living in both types of marketplace, in how you're operating the business. So, that must be very interesting, because it's very rare that somebody both can or does, run, two styles of finance.
Yeah, it's I would say it's been a learning process, along the way. And that's what makes entrepreneurs, that's what makes us, that's why we're wired differently, right? We're willing to learn while we're making it up as we go, right? And in most cases, we're building a plane while it's already full, at 350 miles an hour.
That's right.
It's just, that's just what we're doing. And oh, by the way, as with any large piece of equipment, you're building it with usually the lowest cost subcontractors and pricing, right? So there's just there's a risk reward ratio that I think I'm well aware of. So being able to do both of them, really, man, they are two different styles, both of running a professional services company versus a hardware software company.
Yeah.
But then also running something bootstrap versus running something that is capitalized. And, I think I think it speaks to just the amount of adaptability that you have to have, but also the amount of humility that you have to take into a role like that to know enough to know that you don't know, right? And then to hire a team that is much better at you in certain areas to help you run that. And I mean, the stats show like having a co-founder of a startup is exponentially your ability to be successful. And you know, my advice to a lot of the entrepreneurs that come my way, and you know, we sit down for a cup of coffee, and they say, "Man, what is the biggest, you know, what is the biggest and most powerful thing I can do to grow and scale this business?" And I simply say, man, list down what the most important to the least important job role that you have. And then on a second list what you really like to do versus what you hate to do. And then just start hiring to take all those bottom level tasks and responsibilities, and learn to hire better than yourself, and have a humility about, like, you know, my sales guy, Harrison, he is light years better at sales than I am. But that's his role. That's his giftedness. Right.
Yeah.
So that is, you know, to be able to hire and to be humble enough to know to hire better than yourself in certain skill sets, all the while knowing there are only certain things that you can do. That is a key to growing and scaling a business. But then it really harkens back to the overall sort of posture as an entrepreneur. And you mentioned being able to operate in different areas with different types of finance, but then also, you know, capitalism versus, you know, philanthropy, and sort of this, you know, that mindset. And it really comes back to, for me, of focusing on human flourishing. If I'm focused on human flourishing as a business owner, as a CEO, I'm going to take care of my employees differently. I'm going to hire differently because I'm going to hire them for a specialty where I know they can flourish. And I'm not going to try to control them or suppress them or have them do it my way, because that's not flourishing, right? Yeah. I'm going to try to run the business in a way that is acting in the best interests of as a fiduciary to my shareholders, but then also helping them understand there's value that happens when we take care of our employees a certain way. Maybe our operating expenses are a little higher, even pre-revenue, right? But there's a long-term value creation that happens, versus if you cut corners in certain areas here for the sake of financials, you're actually eroding value long-term. But you have to have that posture of human flourishing and going after that and thinking larger than yourself. That for me, at least, has been a recipe and a posture for success.
Yeah, I wish there was more of you. You know, it is. We definitely, I mean, obviously the business, especially when you get into, you know, taking on venture capital, you know, they have a goal, right? Which is to get outsized returns on their investments, and God bless them, right? That's what they're there for. And they're there to guide you through that process and get you to that goal with their money. And so they can see the benefit from it. And their bets are more wrong than right, just because of the way the market works and the way business works, you know. And that's what I think when you talk about humility, it is the ability to sacrifice your own, you know, future on a bet. It's a tough, I don't like the bet it's literally not a coin flip, because you're affecting the outcome. You're doing everything you can. You're pouring yourself into creating an outcome. But the statistics are not in anyone's favor as a founder.
Right.
And
yeah,
it's a big responsibility. But then when you can see, you know, what you can do and what you can do for the team you bring with you on that journey, that's where you find serial founders. You don't find serial selfish founders. They become rich once, invest their riches, and become richer and richer. Like, there's a world of folks that are really succeeding in that area, but you really see like a serial founder doesn't do it by being an asshole.
Yeah.
And then even more rare is somebody really as understanding as and as caring and as empathetic as you are, Eddy, and to be able to bring that in and to look and say, with every decision that I make, who else benefits as a result of this? And is there a way I can scale the benefit, not just the outcome of the dollar, which is really pretty cool to see.
Thank you. Thanks for saying that.
You got to teach this course, Eddy. You got to, we need that, but that's, and I'm interested, before we wrap, how did you feel as you went through school and you met with early founders and you went through the first journey? Like now looking back on it, did you feel there was areas and like opportunities for education that prepared you for this real idea of ethical growth and give back capability? Because I wonder, like, is it out there and more people just need to get at it, or do we think it's actually missing in kind of the educational system and the access and those early choices we make?
I think it's a combination of both. It's out there, but you have to be looking for it, right? You have to, there's somewhere in your story where someone pops in the idea of like, hey, there's value creation here and more than just financial, right? And there's a way to not just be ethical, but to be redemptive. And that's a small voice, but it's out there, right? It's out there. And I was just fortunate enough to have people and organizations and thoughts all along the way that helped me kind of open my eyes to the fact that there's an opportunity for human flourishing, an opportunity for building and empowering people, an opportunity for giving them dignity and respect, and an opportunity for free market capitalism to thrive, all in the same setting.
Yeah, and I think it's really good that it's out there to be had, definitely. And I think as
Absolutely.
more and more people discover that, and we see more stories, like your own personal story, Eddy, and that of Eden Green, I think we're going to see this next wave of entrepreneurs are very much going to be rooted in that, or much more than will be. And that I think will have an amplification, hopefully, too, as each generation and each group of founders comes through. It'll be much more bound to not just ethics, but I like how you say this as redemptive. What can we do that's really going to create a positive human impact? So it's pretty cool. Pretty cool. I'm excited about it. And like I said,
thank you.
The technology is really cool, and I love that. I grew up as a kid, and I was actually near one of the most sort of famous people in the little wee tiny village that I grew up in called Guildford, Ontario. Is Bradford Greenhouses was it's a small little town that I was nearby. And little fellow that I went to school with, his name was Frank Ferragini, and he's now Frankie Flowers, which is famous on a Toronto news station. He did their weather. Yeah. Actually, a media personality. Frankie's fantastic, but they did traditional sort of flat greenhousing mostly for just plants, and so I was way too in the weeds on knowing exactly what you're talking about when you're talking about those greenhouses. I grew up around a lot of them, and 1.5 acres can create a whole lot of good when it's green inside it. And let's get more. Let's get more of those greenhouses out there.
Yeah, let's do it.
So for folks that want to actually find out more and want to connect with you, Eddy, what's the best way to get in touch?
So go to edengreen.com, EDENgreen.com. Also on social, it's all at Eden Green Tech. So just add the tech on the end of it for all the social handles, LinkedIn and Twitter and Instagram and all that. Personally, you can probably find out more about me at badrina.com, just my last name, BADRINA.com. Yeah.
Nice. Well, this has been an incredible joy, and thank you for sharing your story. And like I said, I'm going to take you up on that second story. It's funny that when you say like you described, people's lives and you sit in their story. And I've always said, like, everyone has a story, and my hope is that I can uncover it. It's cool to meet somebody who has an amazing story.
Why, thank you. Thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be on here.